So all of us, as was nicely queued up, have something very much in common. Regardless of what company you work for, what role you have in the organization, we all have something that we want to change. It might be our boss's mind. It might be the way our colleagues approach something. It might be the way the entire organization thinks about the future of work. But as we've talked about a lot today, change is really hard. Often we push, we pressure, we cajole, and nothing happens. And so the simple question I'm going to ask this afternoon is, could there be a better way? Could there be a better way to change minds and drive action, not by pushing, but by doing something else? And so I'll talk about a few things this afternoon. I'll talk about how we can redesign our workforces, how we can shift workflows and change the way the organization thinks about talent, but really at the core, how we can think differently about the future of work and the possibilities that involves. And so as was nicely mentioned, I'm Professor Jonah Berger. I'm a marketing professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And what I'll do this afternoon, sort of the 45 minutes that we have together, is give you a brief tour of, as nicely mentioned, my most recent New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, The Catalyst: How to Change Anyone's Mind. I'll talk about why people change, but more importantly, why they don't, and how we can learn from that. Right? How by understanding when change happens and when it doesn't, and most importantly, why, we can make whatever we want to change more likely. Before we dive in, though, one quick plug from me, which is most of the research that I'm doing at the moment relates in some way, shape, or form to natural language processing, automated textual analysis, extracting behavioral insight from textual data. So this includes looking at customer service calls to look at the language that agents use and the paralanguage they use that increases customer satisfaction. Looking at sales pitches to figure out what makes them more effective. Looking at tens of thousands of pieces of written content to what leads to longer reads. Looking at help pages for companies like Apple and others to think about what makes those pages more helpful, all by using the language hidden inside these things. We've looked at movie scripts to understand why movies succeed and fail. We've looked at song lyrics to understand what makes a hit. If this sounds boring to you, do not worry. I am not going to talk about it today. So you're good news, I'm not going to talk about it. If this sounds interesting to you, unfortunately, I'm not going to talk about it today. But please reach out afterwards. Lots of research we've been doing in this space, both involving machine learning, but also more basic tools like dictionaries and topic modeling to understand more effective ways to use language. And some of this research will actually be out in a book that's coming out next year called Magic Words. So I'm happy to share some of the research and other things with you guys if you're interested. But let's dive into the challenge of change. And as I talked about already, kind of each of you is on a hero's journey. You have something you want to change. You are the hero in that hero's journey. But as you've probably heard already today, there's a villain in that hero's journey, as there is in any good hero's journey. And the villain today is something called the status quo bias. Right? And I think this is something that all of you are familiar with, or at least many of you are. It's a phrase you've probably heard a number of times today. I even heard it a few times in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so. But there's a bias to stick with the status quo. Right? Whenever we make a choice, we're often making a choice between something new and something old. Some way we've done things in the past and some new way of things we could do in the future. But even when the new thing is better, we have a bias to stick with the past. In fact, research shows even when the old thing is about 2.6 times better, right? The new thing is 2.6 times better than the old one, we tend to stick with the old. And that's why it's a bias. Even when the new is better, we tend to stick with the old. And there are three key reasons, I call them the sort of horsemen of inertia, that underlie this status quo bias. The first is ease. It's just easier to do what we're doing already. Right? I've never looked at your shopping list, but I bet when you go to the grocery store, you basically buy the same things every time. Not exactly the same things, but if you buy milk, you buy it in a certain size from a certain brand. If you buy eggs, you buy it from a certain size and a certain brand. Right? It's just easier to do that. It requires less work. Same with the way that you source talent, right? There's a way you've done that in the past. It's easier in some sense to stick with what we've done before, requires less work, and so we stick with it. That's the first horseman of inertia. The second, though, is attachment. We are attached to the old way of doing things. Products, services, ideas, approaches aren't just approaches. They're someone's approach. They're someone's project. They're someone's idea. And that person or people, they don't want to let it go because it's theirs, right? We become attached to things that are ours. There's some nice research in the context of home buying and home selling that shows the longer you've lived in a home, the more you value that home above and beyond market price. Right? So sure, home values tend to go up, but even controlling for that going up, the longer you've lived there, the more you value it. Why? Because it's your house, your apartment. you can't imagine letting it go. You become attached to it, you value it more, and so you're less willing to let it go. But that third horseman of inertia is equally important, right? And that is that old things feel safe and new things feel risky, right? We all know the problems with the old stuff, right? New things feel risky because we don't know what the problems are. It could be better, but it could also be worse, and why take the risk? So people are scared of new things. It's not that old things are safe, but they feel safe, right? Because they're the devil, we know they feel safer, and so we feel more comfortable sticking with them even when new things may be better. So how do we overcome the status quo bias? How do we get people to change even when they're kind of dragging their feet, right? Even when they should move along. And so it turns out when we think about change, there's a approach we tend to think of. I've interviewed thousands of executives from a variety of different industries and asked them two questions. What's something you want to change? And what is something you've done already or could imagine doing to try to change it? And over 98% of the time, people list some version of pushing. What do I mean by pushing? Well, add more facts, provide more reasons, give one more presentation, make one more phone call. If I could just convince them, persuade them, just give them a little bit more information, they will come around. And it's kind of why we think that works, right? If there's a chair in the middle of a room and we want to get that chair to go, right, what do? Well, we push on it, right? We provide force on one side of that chair and it slides across the floor. And so often we think about that same approach and we apply it to people. We say, hey, if I just push this person, this colleague, this group, this organization, they will change. Think about the last time you pushed somebody. Or even better, think about the last time someone pushed you. You just slide across the floor? Probably not. Probably did what? Push back, dug in your heels, resisted. Think about all the reasons the person is an idiot, right? You came up with a whole bunch of forces in the opposite direction. Chairs are great because we push them, they go right along. People are the opposite. We push them, they push back. And the more force we push in a particular direction, the more reasons and information and things they marshal to disagree with us, right? If you've ever tried to disagree with a relative, a distant relative on Thanksgiving about politics, right? Whatever you say is not going to make them go, oh yeah, you're right. It's just going to make them more convinced that you're wrong. They're going to dig in their heels even more and be less likely to change. And so if pushing doesn't work, what does? Well, it turns out there's a nice analogy to be made to chemistry. And I'm not a chemist, I'm not smart enough to be a chemist, but I have some friends who are chemists, and they talk about how change in chemistry is really hard, right? Think about it taking eons to squeeze carbon into diamonds. Think about plant matter being turned into oil. It takes a long amount of time. And so in the lab, chemists often add temperature and pressure. They add energy to a system to create change. They heat things up, they squeeze them together, right, to create change faster and easier. But it turns out there's a special set of substances that chemists often add that make change happen faster and easier. But it doesn't increase the temperature and it doesn't increase the pressure, right? These substances do everything from clean the grime on your contact lenses to clean the grime in your car's engine, and multiple Nobel Prizes have been won for innovations in this space. But most interestingly is how they create the change. They don't add more energy, right? They reduce the amount of energy required. They find an alternate path that requires less energy, not more. As some of you can already guess, these substances are called catalysts, right? And catalysts in the chemical world allow change to happen with less energy. In the social world, we just think about a catalyst as someone that helped make change. Someone was a catalyst. They were the thing that happened right before the change. But catalyst actually has a very specific meaning. They don't just create change, they lower the barriers or obstacles to change, right? Great catalysts don't say, well, what could I do to get someone to come along to change? They say, well, why hasn't that person changed already? What's stopping them? What are the barriers or obstacles that are getting in the way? And how by removing those barriers or obstacles can I make change more likely? Not adding more force, but identifying the barriers and removing them. It's a little bit like being parked in your car on a hill. So think about you leave your kid's soccer game or you go to a movie, your car is parked on a hill. You get in the car, you stick your key in the ignition, right? You put your foot on the gas. If the car doesn't go, we say, I just need more gas. Let me step on that pedal a little harder. Same with change. People don't come around in that meeting. What do we tend to do? We schedule a follow-up and another 50 PowerPoint slide deck that we think if we just get our extra point in, they'll come around, right? We can step on the gas in this car all we want. If the parking brake is pulled up, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not about more gas. It's about identifying the barriers to change and removing them. Or said simply, it's about finding the parking brakes. And that's the main thing I'm going to talk about today, right? How can we be better change agents? By identifying the barriers to change and mitigating them, right? Not pushing people harder, but figuring out, well, why haven't they changed already? And using that to help us change. And in writing this book, I've talked to an amazing set of change agents. I've talked to top-selling salespeople and consultants and people that change their boss's mind, but I also talked to some more unusual folks. I talked to hostage negotiators. I talked to substance abuse counselors. I talked to parenting experts, which depending on if any of you have, I don't know, a 2 to 7-year-old, you probably think are the most difficult people to change out there. Again and again, same barriers came up, right? Regardless of what domain we were talking about or industry or thing we were trying to change, same 5 barriers came up. And so in the Catalyst, I put them in a framework called the REDUCE framework. That stands for reactance, endowment, distance, uncertainty, and corroborating evidence. Each of these is a barrier that comes up again and again in whatever we're trying to change. But by understanding them and removing them, we can make change more likely. And I picked the word reduce because notice that's exactly what great catalysts do. They don't push harder. They don't add more energy. They figure out what the barriers to change are and they reduce them. They mitigate them, right, to make change more likely. And so that's going to be my goal today. We don't have a lot of time. I'm not going to be able to go through everything in the framework. I picked out 2 barriers in particular, reactance and uncertainty, because I think they're most relevant for some of the things you guys are wrestling with. I'll give you a brief overview of some of those ideas, but most importantly, I'll leave you with some techniques you can apply tomorrow to hopefully make change more likely in whatever area you're trying to change. All right, so let's dive in. And I want to start with a story about these. Does anyone know what these are? Tide Pods. Okay, I want to tell you a little story about Tide Pods. It's about a decade ago, Tide, owned by Procter & Gamble, wanted to make laundry faster and easier. Now, we've all done laundry. It's not that difficult, but as with anything else, it can be made easier. You never know how much detergent to add, right? It turns out to be better if some went in early in the cycle and some went in later, and I don't know about you, but I always spill some of the liquid stuff and it gets on my hand or the counter and it's sticky and all that stuff. So Tide invests a whole bunch of money in R&D, and they come up with these things called Tide Pods. Take one of these beautiful, colorful squares, chuck it in the laundry machine, set it and forget it. Solves all those problems. They spend $100 million on marketing, and they hope and take a big chunk of the over $1 billion laundry industry. Okay, so they release Tide Pods, and they're doing okay, but then they hit a snag, which is that people are eating them. And I want to pause here for just a second, because at least one of you was on your phone. You're like, oh, I get this talk. He's going to talk about change, whatever. Tide Pod, sure, I get it. And then I said, people are eating them, and you picked your head up. Like, people are eating them. Hold on, wait a second. That must be a mistake. No, they are filled with chemicals, but people were eating them. There's a video online that said they looked good enough to eat. There was a picture of some of them melted on top of a pizza, and suddenly young people, mostly young people, maybe some of you, but mostly young people, were challenging one another to eat Tide Pods. It's called the Tide Pod Challenge. Anybody do the Tide Pod Challenge, by the way? I hope not. Good. Now imagine you're a Tide executive in this situation. What do? Right? So they did what most companies do when they don't know what to do. They had a big meeting and they decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to solve it. We're going to release a press release, because that'll solve everything. And they said, hey, don't eat Tide Pods. And then they said, wait, no, maybe that's not enough. We'll do what companies also do when they don't know what to do. We will hire a celebrity. So I hired this gentleman, Rob Gronkowski. I used to be able to say of New England Patriots fame, then I had to say of Tampa Bay Buccaneers fame. Now I guess we don't know of what fame. Maybe he will be of Tampa Bay Buccaneers fame, maybe not. But famous NFL football player to shoot a public service announcement saying, should every Tide Pods? No. What about just for fun? No. Okay? Tide told people not to do it. Gronk told people not to do it. They thought that would be the end of it. Well, I'm a data guy. Here's a little data. This is searches for the Tide Pod Challenge over time. And what do you notice? Well, they're kind of flat, right? Going up a little bit up until the moment Tide releases their announcement. Now, Tide is hoping that their announcement will stem the tide or interest in the Tide Pod Challenge, that search interest will go down and that will be the end of it. That's not what happened. In fact, right after, interest in the Tide Pod Challenge shot up over 400%. And it wasn't just parents wondering what their kids are up to. Visits to poison control shot up as well. In the next 2 weeks, more people came into poison control than had in the 2 years prior. Very simply, a warning became a recommendation. Telling people not to do something actually made them more likely to do it. And so you may be sitting there going, well, this is a funny example. What does it have to do with me? I don't work for Tide, and I'm trying to get people to do something, not to do something. But it turns out this is just one example of a much broader phenomenon called reactance. When people are pushed to do something or not to do something, they often do the exact opposite of what we want them to do. They push back. And so let's spend a couple minutes talking about the science of reactance, and most importantly, what we can do to reduce it. So at its core, reactance is about agency as control. People like feeling like they are in the driver's seat. Why did I make a certain choice? Why did I support a certain initiative? Why did I change the way the organization thought about work? I did it because I thought it was a good idea. I weighed the costs and balances, and I came to that decision on my own. But as soon as we, whether we are a colleague, whether we are a boss, whether we are someone outside the organization, as soon as we come in and start to tell someone what to do, they push back. So hold on, now I'm not in the driver's seat, you're in the driver's seat. And the more I feel like you're in the driver's seat, the less interested I am in doing what you wanted to do in the first place. Essentially, people have an ingrained anti-persuasion radar. Something like a missile defense system. It sort of circulates, looking in the environment, thinking, okay, are there incoming projectiles? If I feel like someone's trying to persuade me, it activates some knowledge and I engage in defensive measures to avoid being persuaded. I avoid or ignore the message. Right? I leave the room when a commercial comes on. I change the channel. I delete an email. I hang up the phone. Right? Even worse, I counter-argue. This is actually exactly what you guys are doing now. You're listening to me, but you're not just sitting there going, yes, yes, yes. You're sitting there going, yes, but. Yes, but that one won't work here. Yes, but that might make sense in this part, but won't help me with this other thing, right? We're not just listening, we're counter-arguing. The more we feel like someone's trying to persuade us, the more we poke and prod their argument till it comes crumbling down. And so if pushing doesn't work, well, what does? Well, at the core, we need to stop trying to sell people so much and get them to buy in. We need to stop trying to persuade people so much and get them to persuade themselves. We need to allow for agency. We need to give them back some of that freedom and control that makes them feel like they are getting to make a choice. And I know that sounds rather vague and abstract, so let me give you 3 concrete strategies to do that. The first is what I'll call providing a menu. This one is painfully simple, okay? Too often, right, when we want people to do something, we go into that meeting and we say, hey, I think that we should do X. And let me tell you about X. Let me list all the reasons why X is a great idea. Here's why I think we should do X, blah, 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 blah. And our audience, as we just talked about, is sitting there going, okay, but here's why X won't work. Here's why X will be too expensive. Here's all the problems with X, right? They have a job, and their job is to shoot down whatever they're hearing. So what great catalysts, what great change agents do is something subtly but importantly different. They don't just say, hey, we should do X. They say, hey, I think we should do X or Y. Which one do you think is better? And notice what that does. It subtly shifts the role of the listener. Now that person has a different job. Rather than sitting there and thinking about all the reasons they don't like what you suggested, instead, now you've asked them to think about which one they like more. And because they're focused on which one they like more, they're much more likely to go along with one of them at the end of the interaction. And it's called providing a menu because this is exactly what happens when we go out to dinner. They don't just say, here's dinner. At least most places don't say, here's dinner. They say, hey, choose from a limited set of options. It's guided choice, right? They don't say, have whatever you want for dinner. You can't go to an Italian place and get Japanese food. They say, here's a limited set of options. Choose from within the choice set. But because you've given people real options, because they're focused on what they could have, they don't think about all the other things outside that choice set, right? They're focused on the options here. They're weighing the cost of the balances. They're doing their due diligence, but you've encouraged them to do the due diligence within the set of options you want them to consider, right? Making them more likely to pick something that you want at the end. Let me give you another strategy called Ask, Don't Tell, which is sort of an extension of providing a menu. And so the core insight here is, hey, when we ask questions, people don't push back. We make statements, they push back. When we ask questions, again, we give them a different job. I was talking to a startup founder a couple of years ago. She was having trouble motivating her team. She wanted them to stay late after work and put in extra hours, and they were like, thanks, but no thanks. I'm burnt out, I'm tired, I don't want to do it. So she calls a meeting, and she starts with a rhetorical question. She says, what kind of company do we want to be? A good company or a great company? Now, you know how everyone answers that kind of, great company, right? But then she asks a real question. Awesome. How do we get there? How do we become that great company? And they start having a conversation. People share different ideas, right? And they have a conversation around this because questions do 3 things, right? First, they deactivate that anti-persuasion radar. Again, you've given the audience a new job. Rather than think about why they hate your statement, you've asked them for their opinion, which most people are more than happy to give you. All right, so that's point number one. Point number two is you're collecting information. Too often as change agents, we know a lot about the outcome we want to achieve and very little about the audience that we're trying to change. I've worked on change management and new consumer adoption projects with a variety of organizations. Again and again, people always go, oh, I don't know why it didn't work. And when I say, okay, well, why didn't it work? Did we collect any data to figure out? Say, I don't know. I know it didn't work, but I don't know why. Well, if we don't understand our audience, right, this is traditional marketing 101, being customer-centric, where that customer is a true consumer or customer, where that customer is a boss or a colleague, if we don't understand the barriers for them, it's going to be really hard to change their mind. Right? And so questions allow us to collect that information. They allow the boss to better understand, well, why don't people want to stay late? Maybe it's not that they don't want to stay late, right? Maybe it's they got to put their kids to bed and they're happy to come back online, maybe at 9 or 10 or 8 and work once the kids are asleep, but they can't stay at work to work, right? But understanding those barriers allows you to craft a solution that works for everybody. But the third thing is equally important and interesting, and that is that questions encourage commitment to the conclusion. Because if you ask people, hey, what could we do to become a great organization? Someone says, I think we should do X, and you say, great, we're going to do X. It's a lot harder for that person not to go along because it was their idea in the first place. Right? Too often we want to have ownership of the success, but if we give it away to others, if we allow more people to have ownership and more participation in the process, it's going to be harder for them to say no. I was talking to someone a few weeks ago, and I said, God, it's so funny. My boss loves feeling like something is their idea. I said, I don't think it's just your boss. Right? Everybody likes feeling like something is their idea. The more it's our idea, the more bought into it, the more ownership we have of it, the more we want to succeed. Right? We want to help it succeed. So give away ownership. Right? Allow people to participate in the process, to get ownership of the decision, and they'll root for you along the way. Let me give you one more strategy, and then we'll talk about uncertainty. And this one's called highlighting a gap. And to get into this, I want to show you an anti-smoking ad from Thailand. Because anti-smoking ads from Thailand have a lot to do with changing the future of work, right? Clearly. I know when you got up this morning, you're like, I'm probably going to see an anti-smoking ad from Thailand today. So I want you to watch this ad. I want you to watch what they do, and there'll be subtitles at the bottom because it's not in English. But most importantly, I want you to think about why it works, right? What about this message and campaign makes you so successful? So here we go.
เส้นเลือดในสมองแตกไม่ดีแล้วพี่ดูดทำไมล่ะคะ
All right, so that went by pretty quickly, but in case you didn't notice, the campaign was hugely successful. 40% increase in calls to the quit line, videos of the campaign go viral around the web, millions of views. But more interesting is why it worked. Why do you think it worked? Quick set of thoughts, a couple hands. Why was this campaign so successful in changing behavior? What about it made it work? What do you mean by that? The adult was selling the child, you're saying. Yeah, so interesting. So this is the Thai Health Promotion Foundation. They realized they had a key problem, which is they told smokers to quit. What were smokers going to do? Tell them to buzz off, right? Forget you. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not interested, right? Many people have told me to quit smoking. I am not interested in someone else telling me to quit smoking, right? And they realize something that goes beyond smoking also, which is information wasn't the problem. Too often as change agents, we think that information is the problem. We think that if people just had a little bit more information, they'd come around, right? Oh, if I just give them some more information, they would see things from my perspective. What I love here is smokers know all about the dangers of smoking. They know more than doctors know about the dangers of smoking. Lung cancer, emphysema, strokes, they know all the dangers, and they're still doing it. So giving them more information about the dangers of smoking isn't going to change the problem, right? The Talent Promotion Foundation realized they had to do something different. And so, as your colleague nicely pointed out, it turns out that we like our attitudes and our actions to line up. If I say I care about the environment, I better recycle. If I say I care about a certain sports team, I better watch their games once in a while. And if my attitudes and my actions don't line up, a negative emotional reaction occurs called cognitive dissonance that we do work to resolve. We got to change our attitudes or actions. And that's exactly what they did here, right? The smokers just told the little kid not to smoke, but the kid pointed out that they're smoking, so they've got a choice. Either I can tell this kid to smoke, which I'm not going to do, or I can quit smoking which is what 40% of them did. Right? Because this campaign highlighted a gap between attitudes and actions. And I think the word highlighted is really important here. Because just because there is a gap doesn't mean that people see it. Right? There's often a gap between things we say and things we do, but they're not put next to each other, so we never see them. But by putting them next to one another, right? No kid has ever asked a smoker, can I have a light? But by having that happen, it encourages the smoker to realize, as your colleague pointed out, wait, I just told this person not to do something. Maybe I should think about doing that myself. Not because someone told me to, but because I convinced myself. And the same idea can be applied much more broadly, right? There's a nice example at HP a few years ago where there's a line of business that was losing money. And they were trying to figure out whether they should keep it or not. And they played this little game with themselves. They said, hey, imagine we hire a new leadership team. And they came in. Would they keep the project or not? I said, oh, new leadership team would probably kill the project. And they said, okay, well, why are we still doing it? Right? Why do I need someone else to come in to tell me to kill this? Why can't I get rid of it myself? Right? Encouraging us to get around that status quo bias and realize the advice we might give others or the things others would do that we would suggest that they would do wouldn't be the same thing we're doing ourselves, which encourage us to change their behavior. Same thing with COVID, right? Rather than telling people to get vaccinated or wear a mask, right? Instead say something like, hey, well, would you want other people around you to be doing this, right? If you have an elderly parent or young kids, what would you want other people around you to be doing? Okay, well then maybe you should think about doing the same thing yourself. Not telling people what to do, but encouraging them to come to that conclusion themselves by guiding them down a particular path. And that, I think, is the big takeaway from the reactance section. Don't tell people what to do. Encourage them, guide them down a path towards a direction that you want them to go. Okay, I'm not going to talk about endowment today or distance. I will spend a few minutes on uncertainty and then I will wrap up. And to talk about uncertainty, I want to talk about something in particular. Let me just see here. Are we missing a slide? I think we're missing a slide. Okay, well, it's okay. If it shows up later, it shows up later. I want to talk for a second about switching costs. Anytime there's a change, there's what's called switching costs. And I think most of you guys are probably familiar with the idea of switching costs. Think about moving from like an Apple phone to a Google phone or vice versa. Think about buying a new lawnmower or a different type of computer than you've bought before, right? There's all these costs of change. Some of it's monetary. Buying a new phone costs money, but a lot of it is time and effort. It takes work to figure out how to use this new phone. It takes work to port all my contacts and information over, right? Anytime we do something new, there's a cost of change. And not surprising, that cost stymies action, right? The cost of change, well, I might as well stick with the old thing because it feels not costly and the new things feel costly. But let me tell you, it gets worse. Think about when you incur the cost of change and when you incur the benefits of change. Which often happens first, the costs of change or the benefits? Costs. And which is there more certainty around, the cost of change or the benefits of change? Costs, right? You're asking people to undergo certain costs now for uncertain benefits later. Trust me, it's going to be better later. We just have to get over this big cost hill or hurdle first. Not surprising, people say, well, no thanks. I've got this thing now. It's not terrible, right? But this new thing is a lot of work. And so why do I want to deal with all that work? I'll just stick with the thing I did in the past. This is called the cost-benefit timing gap. Costs are now, benefits are later. Costs are certain, benefits are uncertain. So how do we overcome that gap? Well, let me tell you, it gets a little worse. I want to tell you about a study that was done at Stanford a few years ago. They asked students to imagine it's the end of the semester. You just took a tough exam. You feel tired and run down. But congratulations, you passed. You have the opportunity to get a 5-day attractive Hawaii vacation package at a low price. Do you want to get that package now? Do you want to not buy the package at all? Or do you want to decide later? Okay, most students thought about it and said, look, I just passed an exam. Let me go celebrate. I will buy the vacation package. That makes sense. There was a second group of students, though, that were given a very slightly different version of this scenario. All the details were the same vacation package, same tired and run down feeling, except I'm sorry you failed that exam. Do you want to buy the package, not buy the package, or decide later? Now, failures didn't feel good. They felt bad. You just failed an exam, but you can't take it right away anyway. You got to study somewhere, right? Why not sort of do your work somewhere fun and sort of get yourself back to health and feel a little better? So most of the failures said they're going to buy the vacation package. Again, that makes sense. But there's one more group. There's a third group. And these folks, the only thing that changes is there's uncertainty. You don't know yet whether you passed or you failed. You'll find out tomorrow. Do you want to buy the package, not buy the package, or decide later? And what I love about this study is for any of you who like economics, decision trees, all that stuff, you got it all mapped out. If you pass the exam, you'll buy the vacation package. And if you fail the exam, you'll buy the vacation package. And so even if you don't know yet whether you passed or you failed, what should you do? Buy the vacation package. Do you think that's what people did? No. They said, well, I'll decide later. What they did is they hit the pause button. Anytime people don't know what to do, they do nothing. Sitting there hoping that the uncertainty will resolve. If I just wait a little more, maybe that uncertainty will resolve, and then I can make a choice, right? If that ever happens, right? And that's the challenge, another challenge of uncertainty. It causes inaction. How do we get people to unpause? How do we get people to overcome that barrier to action and move forward, right? Even when it seems difficult or unlikely, right? And so one way to think about this is how can we lower the barrier to trial? How can we make it easier for people to experience the value that someone is offering? Right? And so we can think about this in a lot of ways, right? We can think about things like Dropbox and other companies that harness something called freemium. That's one way to lower the barrier to trial. But this is actually just one example of a much broader phenomenon, right? Think about what happens when you go to a car dealership. Imagine you walk and you say, hey, I'd like to check out that new car. They say, fantastic, give us $50,000 and we'll let you check it out. You say, no thanks, right? I don't know if I want it yet, and so I'll just sit tight. What do? They give people test drives, right? Allowing them to experience the value of the offering. What does free shipping do, right? Same thing, right? Free shipping enabled e-commerce because people didn't want to have to pay to figure out whether they would like something or not. Same with free samples at the grocery store. It's not just monetary cost. It's the one thing I want to highlight here, right? It's the value of understanding what the offering is. What these things do at the core is they solve the uncertainty problem. They solve that cost-benefit timing gap. Costs are now, benefits are later. Well, if we can allow you to experience the value of something sooner, right? By making it easier for people to experience it, whether through one of these means or another, by lowering that barrier to trial, we can encourage them to figure out whether they're going to like it or not and be more likely to move towards action. And this is true within organizations as well. There's a nice story, some of you may have heard about it before, about how Zappos was founded. Right? Sort of the founding story of Zappos. And I've given some external examples of sort of de-risking things for customers, but the same is true internally. So Zappos, as you know, sort of online shoe company, had a lot of trouble raising money. This was in the early 2000s. I know today we do everything online, right? We buy houses online, we find spouses online. Some of you may have even bought things online during this presentation. But in the early 2000s, it wasn't clear that online shopping was going to work. Right? And most of online shopping was actually B2B, if it was occurring at all. And Zappos had trouble raising money. The only good news was that venture firms were like, look, right, you don't have any competition because it's a bad area to get into, and so if you can figure it out, it'll be great. They had a certain amount of venture money, but if they spent it all at once, they were done. Right? It would cost a lot of money to build warehouses and get all the inventory and build a beautiful website, and all their money would be gone once they did that. And so if it didn't work, they were toast. And so instead of doing all that work first, they tried to de-risk it a little bit. They did something really interesting. Right? They went to local running shoe stores, and they said, hey, I'd like to take a picture of your inventory and put them on my website. And if some people buys those shoes from me, I'll buy them from you, right, and send them to the customer. And the running shoe store said, well, that's interesting. I don't really know what a website is, but you want to sell my inventory? That sounds great. One question, though. You're buying it from me for $100, and you're selling it to the customer for $100, and you're paying for shipping, aren't you going to lose money? And indeed, Zappos lost $5, $10, even $15 on every pair of shoes that they sold, but it was still an amazing strategy. Why? Well, first, they only lose money if people buy shoes. Nobody buys shoes. They don't lose any money. They lose a little money. They have to take the pictures and stuff, but they've made it sort of compatible, right? They've made it that they're only going to lose money if their bet works. And second, even if they lose money, it's much less money than they would have lost putting all the eggs in one basket up front. And so the same idea here, how can we lower the barrier to trial internally for strategies, right? We want to do something, how can we allow people to experience some of the benefit without going sort of whole hog so people see the value? And let me give you one last example of this, and then I'll wrap up. So Acura has this exact problem that we talked about before with sort of car dealerships, right? People like Acura a lot. Any of you who own an Acura probably love it, right? People who love Acura, who own an Acura, tend to come back and buy another one. There just aren't enough people like that. They have dealerships, and they have test drives, but the problem is that not enough new people, not enough potential customers are taking test drives. People either don't think of the brand, or they think of the brand, but they don't think they'd like it. How can we get people to try something if they don't think they'd be interested in it? All right, this is the exact problem Acura was facing with a couple of years ago. So they did something interesting. They paired with W Hotels, and when people checked in, they got a little slip of paper saying, hey, as part of W's Anywhere, Anytime program, you can get in a ride in an Acura wherever you want for free. You don't need to be in the car market. You don't need a new car. You just need a ride to the airport, your meeting, wherever you want. You can get a ride in an Acura MDX absolutely free. Now, did all the people staying at W Hotels take a ride in Acura? No, but hundreds of thousands of them did. Did all those people buy Acuras? No, but tens of thousands did, right? Including many people that had never considered Acura before. Because what this program did is it drove discovery. It brought the trial to people. Right? Too often we say, okay, well, hey, come do this thing, you'll get trial. But there's a whole bunch of people that don't even know that they would like it. How can we bring it to them and embed it in something they're already doing? I tell a great story of the book, how this happened within an organization at a big bank where they were interested in a customer service initiative. Management didn't believe in it. And so instead of trying to convince management again and again, which wasn't working, they sort of put their management through that experience initiative. Right? They put their leaders through exactly what the customers would go through about getting warm greetings when they came in and being more connected to other people and all those warm, fuzzy things that management at a European bank thought that no customer cared about. They thought that customers only cared about rates. Next meeting they had, management didn't say, well, hey, I don't think customers will like it. They thought, I do think customers like it because I like it, because I've been experiencing this myself. Right? Putting people through the experiences you want them to see rather than forcing them to come and accept trial. Okay, so just to wrap up, as I talked about this afternoon, we talked about at least a couple of these. Catalysts reduce roadblocks. And what do we mean by that? Well, first of all, they reduce reactance. And we talked about a number of ways to do that, right? Giving people choice, asking questions, highlighting a gap. We didn't get to talk about easing endowment, but the main insight there is we are attached, as I talked about at the beginning, to old things, right? And we have to encourage people to detach from those old things. We think old things are safe, new things are risky. Old things are not as safe as we might think. Right? So we need to lower that attachment, encourage people to realize that sticking with the status quo isn't as costless as it might seem. We also need to shrink distance. Too far from someone's backyard, too far from where someone is currently, they tend to ignore us. If we're asking for too big a change, they say no thanks. We need to break big change down into smaller chunks. Ask for less and then ask for more. Or do what product designers often talk about, use stepping stones. Right? Often when we want to get people to make a big change, rather than doing it right away, we sort of think about what are some hops, skips, and jumps that can allow them to get across that big river in more than one step. Right? You ask someone to cross a big river, they say, oh, I don't know, I'm going to get covered in water, but they can step across easily, a lot more likely to make that change. We talked about easing uncertainty, lowering the barrier to trial, making it easier for people to experience things, and corroborating evidence is about multiple sources of proof, multiple sources of evidence, right? Sometimes one source isn't enough. We need to hear from multiple others. Just to wrap up, 2 key next steps from this talk. I go to lots of events like this, and I often leave going, what do I do next? I've got pages and pages of notes, but like, what of these things do I implement next? And so I'm going to say 2 things from this talk this afternoon. First, let's get better at finding those parking brakes. I showed you 5. You may be sitting there going, but there's a 6th or a 7th. Great. What is it? Right? We are often blind to barriers. We know a lot about the outcome we want to achieve, a lot less about the barriers in the way. Right? But when we go to a doctor's office, the doctor doesn't start by saying, let me put a cast on your leg. Doctor starts by saying, tell me about the problem. Let's get better at diagnosing the problem, understanding the people and groups and organizations that we're trying to change, finding those parking brakes. And then second, Let's use the reduce framework to figure out how to mitigate them, right? Let's reduce reactants, ease endowment, and so on. And in case it's helpful, there's a bunch of resources on my site, booklets and workbooks and application guides for working with your teams and one-pagers and things along those lines, from changing a boss's mind to changing consumer behavior and so on. Because good news, it's not random, it's not luck, and it's not chance. There's a science behind why people change and why they don't. If we understand that science, we can be better communicators and better change agents at the core. We can change anything. Thank you guys very much.